Indigenous officer for the University of Sydney, Indigenous officer for the New South Wales.
I will acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We meet on their stolen land. Pay my respects to elders past and present, of course, and also acknowledge any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person that is here in the room or at the book fair today. So my name is Kyle Blakeney, and I am a Gummeroi man from the Northern Tablelands of New South Wales. I am originally from a small town in Werris Creek, just south of Tamworth, and I came to Sydney when I was 13 to study at school, and now I go to university and I do a Bachelor of Primary Education. But we're here to talk about Indigenous issues from the past and to the present, and things that have happened in between, and what we can do to help prevent the negative things that have happened in the past. So, three major key points that I'll be talking about is having a look at history, because we all need to know, the history, because up until the 1970s, and right now, with Christopher Pyne taking a lot out of the syllabus, there's only been half the story told in textbooks and in schools. And it's really important to know the truth about the history, because only then will we be able to have a hint of what we can do about that sort of stuff in the future. The second point I'll be talking about is also breaking myths about colonisation, so, like the related stereotypes of us, but then also the heroic stories of our brilliant colonisers that has been depicted throughout schools in the past. And the third point I'll be talking about is what's happening today. So on that note of history, why is it important? And that's basically to avoid the fuck-ups of the past. So if we have a really good idea on that, we can move to the first point, which is, what we experienced throughout colonisation was pretty much, the idea of terra nullius. So this land apparently belonged to nobody when Cook settled in Botany Bay, and a way to keep that under wraps was to eliminate the entire race of anybody who lived here, the entire population of anybody who lived here. And that was going on right up until, the 1950s, from things like stolen generation to poisoning water supplies to basically saying that we're flora and fauna and it is perfectly okay to kill us off because it was like having a kangaroo on your property and you can be shot. A lot of this is, stuff that people will say is, that's ancient times, that's stuff that used to happen, that stuff didn't happen anymore. Well, the reality is that in my hometown where I grew up, my grandmother also lived there, and they lived on the outskirts of town because they weren't allowed to hold real estate. They lived in a tent with wooden floorboards, and they could not go into the town to, do certain things or shop at certain places. And then, you've got things like, of course, the stolen generation, which is a really, really big black mark on Australia's history, which is talked about now, only briefly, but I feel like it's not to the full extent of, what actually happened. And my paternal grandmother was the person who stole the generation, and lucky enough, she was able to find her mother before she passed away. But so many people don't. And as a result, also, so many people don't know where they come from. So many people may not even know that they're Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander. So many people don't know their heritage or their culture. And it's turned out to be a really, really, I suppose, quick and efficient way to wipe out our culture. With this comes the idea of, brutal people will walk into anybody's house, no worries, and take children, or, start raping people and start killing people off and stuff like that. But sometimes you're going to come across somebody with a slight conscience. But even then, at that stage when you've got, the leader of a nation or, certain media or governments that are going to sit there and then degrade a certain type of people, then even that's going to get into the head of some people. And that's where the idea of, coloured people, black people, pretty much anybody who's not white is below or inferior to anybody else. And that still happens today. So they create these stereotypes. I'm a violent, murderous pedophile that is homeless and addicted to every drug under the sun, and can't hold down a job. And that's pretty much me in a nutshell. Completely false, of course, but I assure you it's completely false. But, you know, you've got acts that go across this country with Aboriginal people that do great things. You've got significant milestones that have been crossed. You've also got people, not just black, but white people, anybody that will stand up and say something. Take, for example, the March in March last week, which got, you know, little to no mainstream media. Because some people just don't want to know about it, but then also, especially the government wants you to not know about this, because it's Australia's dark history. You've seen those shirts, all those posters that says White Australia has a black history. And that can work in two ways, you know, because, well, technically it does have a black history. That's 60,000 years worth. But it's a very, very dark time as well. You know, I grew up with the idea in my house that, you know, black is beautiful. And, you know, I'm the best person in the world and I should be proud of where I come from. And, you know, anybody who has, you know, the heritage that matches me should be really proud of where they come from and stuff like that. But then you go out into the real world and, you know, when I left my hometown and stuff and then came down here, it was a massive culture shock. You know, you had people that, A, have never met an Aboriginal person before, or you've got people that will say, I'm not a racist, but, and then you've got people, and then you've got people that will say, well, hang on, no, I've got an Aboriginal friend. You think, well, fucking good for you. That doesn't mean shit, really. Like, you know, if you're not going to grasp the concept of what's actually going on, well, there's no point in you giving me any sort of feedback, because I don't want to hear it, just like you don't want to hear any sort of stuff that's happened to me. Even in my hometown, you know, it was a little bit hard, you know. Family was banned from one of the local cafes because I had a problem with one of their children. And the reason was because when I was in school, my little sister was also in school with me, and she was very much the victim of racism. A little girl took her hat and threw it up in a tree and said, "Now go and fetch it like the black dog you are." And, you know, nobody thinks that that sort of stuff happens, but it actually does. You know, but as a result, it was my family that got banned from that place. You've got things like, you know, just 2 weeks ago, I was trying to get from Leichhardt back to my home in Newtown, and cab drove past, and I put my hand out, and the cab slowed down and looked at me, and then kept driving. And that stuff still happens. You know, the person that the next cab that came along that picked me up was actually a refugee, funnily enough. You know, and they're also stereotyped, you know, to be terrible people, to be people that are come in here and ruin this country and stuff like that, when they're probably, you know, the most compassionate people ever. So, you know, then when, you know, it got to a point where degradation kind of stopped working, and, you know, people started to think for themselves, so the government put in, you know, segregation, and people were separated. You know, people were put into homes, certain religions were taught. I remember my grandmother telling me that when she was taken, they took her to a school down in Bomaderry, and that was her home from then on. And they pretty much had, like, so children were lined up in 3 lines, and they stood there and said, okay, you're Catholic, you're Protestant, and you're Presbyterian, and that was it. And then they started, you know, preaching that sort of stuff to it. So, you know, and then we had assimilation, where people will sit there and say, you know, there are some Aboriginals that are good, there are some Aboriginals that are bad. There's no such thing as a bad Aboriginal. There are bad people, there are good people, but there's no such thing as a bad Aboriginal. They're people. Alright? And there are people that, you know, make the wrong decisions and end up getting fucked up. But the idea that people should sit there and then say, look at him, or look at her, they're a good Aboriginal, be like them, is completely and utterly wrong. It's the idea that, no, look at them, they're doing what you want them to do. You know, they're Warren Mundine, they're Noel Pearson. They're the people that, you know, Abbott's chosen 12 for this Indigenous Advisory Council, which wasn't even democratically elected by us, and they're supposed to tell the government what we want, which is a piece of shit anyway. So to give you an idea of how things were broken up during the past. I've done this presentation a little bit before, but I'm going to retire it at the end of this because, well, personally I'm getting sick. But right now, yeah, please. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, that should be enough. I just said 7 volunteers, and we've got a few pens. And if you've got your own, that's also awesome. And on that piece of paper, I want you to draw the most important thing to you in your life. The most important thing. So whether that's, a representation of your own culture, or whether it's, a picture of a family portrait, or, a peace symbol, or, an anarchist symbol, or whatever you want. I don't care what it is. Draw the most important thing in your life, and this is going to give you an idea on, because we know that Australia was, now it is, how many states do we have? 6? 7? 6, and then the territories. Whereas before colonisation, we had all of thank you. We had all of these. Draw the picture big too. You'll need it.
What's a picture?
Oh, picture, word, whatever. Doesn't matter. Whereas before colonisation, you had over 300 different languages and 300 different tribes and things like that. You had nations. So Australia is one nation, but we have nations. So we say the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And that's how it was sort of set up. And then all of that was kind of ripped apart. So if I could take back those sheets now. What's that?
Friends and family.
Alright, friends and family. We've got knowledge here. What else do we have? I got a picture of me. Thank you. Africa.
Alright, let's not show a representation.
Wait, so is that all the bits of paper that I've got back?
You've got a blank one.
Yeah, that's okay. That's cool. So for those people that drew that, please start up front. Okay, and then colonisation came along, and what's the amount of time? So 226 years, so we'll say however long we've been talking, you've got, I don't know, I'll give you 45 seconds. Work as a team
To put it all back together.
to put all those pieces of paper back together so that the pictures match.
So many people in the blank.
Some people.
Well, you told us to draw a picture. Why didn't they listen?
Oh, look, here we go. Here's some bits, so there's some pencil. You guys have to install it. Thanks. More red
We're right now going to put car back together.
There's a lot of blank pieces over here.
Actually, wait, I think I have. It's the first time I've ever succeeded in this activity.
Alright, stop. And go take a seat. So we've got a little bit of an accordion, some family and friends. The picture of me is looking pretty good. We've got sections of Africa, knowledge is there. I don't know where your labour movement is, there's a little bit there. Yeah. And then we've got all these pieces that are like, floating around over here and we don't kind of know what they're doing. One's floated over to another country. And you can see how hard it is to try and ever put back some of those pieces when things have been, torn up in such a short amount of time. And that's to do with the things like the stereotypes, the killings, the stolen generations and things like that, where it's almost impossible for somebody that has no idea who they are or where they come from or who their family is to try and put themselves back together. And, that's why we have a lot of people that fall into depression. That's why we have a lot of people that, get addicted to things that are going to kill them very, very quickly sometimes. That's why we have high suicide rates. And that's why people just sometimes give up and they think it's actually better in jail. Or they've grown up in a home and end up being institutionalised and start relying on that kind of system, which is exactly what benefits the government. We must now rely on that system. We have to rely on things like the dole, things like pension and stuff like that. And it's the worst thing in the world to know that you're relying on somebody that has fucked you over so many times. Because, governments in the past, people say, this leader wasn't that bad, or, that sort of thing was okay, because they did this, this messed up, but they lifted that sort of thing and all that sort of stuff. But the fact is that for Aboriginal people, no matter how many promises a government makes before they're elected, somehow things end up getting turned upside down. Now, of course there's a 67 referendum, but the people voted on that, the government didn't. Alright, they just sit in Parliament and see what the people have to say. Alright, you've got things like, the native title Mabo case, where it was a High Court decision with some really good argument. But can I please also remind you that native title is not land rights and reconciliation is not justice. It's a tokenistic gesture. Native title is the lowest form of ownership under the Commonwealth Crown, and we got stuck with that. In terms of breaking the myths with these sorts of things, let's also remember that Captain Cook was a pirate, but Captain Cook was not actually captain when he came to this country. He was Lieutenant Cook, and he had specific orders from the Crown that if the land was occupied, then don't take it. But he was the highest ranking officer on his ship, and he claimed terra nullius. So we're for it and for it. And that's how we got around that little sort of speed bump and, hurdle and things like that. Little tiny things that are like technicalities that you can make a whole, heap of people know or assume throughout history because of the sort of stuff that you write in your dominant culture. You've got these paintings of the men standing there at Botany Bay with their guns pointed at the Aboriginals up on the rock, and Cook standing there going, no, because he's a very compassionate person. What a crock of shit. But that's how we're all viewing it these days, because of those sort of historical artefacts, and we assume, okay, this is how it must be. You can't tell me that people talk shit about themselves in their own journals. I'm pretty sure Joseph Banks didn't say, I went out and shot 10 Aboriginals today. No, I went out and shot 10 vermin today. And it paid off. So what's happening now is all those things that I was just talking about, like the stolen generation, the degradation, the segregation, the assimilation, all those shins, is actually happening again. And it started very clearly happening again back in 2005. So all this stuff was happening. My mother went through it. I went through it throughout school a little bit. But very, very clearly, the nation started seeing this happen again in 2005 with the Northern Territory intervention, now renamed the Northern Territory Emergency Response. Okay? And here now you see police brutality once again. You see deaths in custody once again. 2.7% of the population, us, makes up 80% of the prisons. And another way to keep us under control: put them all in jail. Find any minute excuse to lock somebody up for what would be normally a fine or a Section 10 in court is somebody being put in jail, A, until their court date, or B, for a minor offence. And this also brings us down into degradation because, take for example, you've got the student strikes, loads of attention. They're attended by heaps of people. The media covered it a little bit. And then you've got the rally of TJ Hickey down in Redfern. One person got arrested. Within minutes, Sydney Morning Herald had posted an article, Sydney protest turns ugly. I think it speaks for itself. They want you to see that kind of stuff. And, that's where it comes into the Mundines and the Pearsons saying, that's a good Aboriginal, be like them. The pedophile rings in the intervention. Author and journalist John Pilger has investigated this in the film Utopia. And if we have a look at that film, you'll find that the person that actually accused people of the pedophile rings and stuff like that was actually a government official. They darkened his face and blurred his voice and stuff like that. And people actually started to recognise, his posture and his hat that he was wearing. And he was working up there in the intervention and started spreading these rumours. Like, don't get me wrong, if children are in trouble, I will be the first one to step up and say something. But the fact is, we value our children, because we know that they're the only way to ever get something in the future. Funnily enough, once the intervention's in place, and there's pedophile rings coming up, and the whole nation turns against the Northern Territory, the government can have complete control over it, and guess what's underneath all of those sacred sites? A shit ton of uranium. Thank you, Gina Reinhardt. Now we're seeing another stolen generation, where children aren't just being taken from, their houses because of child abuse or, neglect or whatever. They're being taken out of the hospital minutes after they're born. Mothers don't even get to see their children come in with the doctor to hold them for the first time because they're being taken. I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine that happening to me. I'm doing primary school education. I love children. If I ever was to see any sort of that, it would absolutely kill me. You can't even imagine what this would be doing to the parents, let alone somebody that's like, a representative of their culture. That's actually all I have. And I'm going to hand it over to Ray.
Yeah. So you've just had the whole history explained quite well. It's always a pleasure for people of my age to sit with younger people on these forums and listen to their knowledge, their passion,